Good day to everyone who has joined us today. Welcome to the first of an annual conference series in Ethics and Explainability for Responsible Data Science. This conference is being hosted by the Data Science Across Disciplines Research Group from University of Johannesburg in South Africa and the Perception Robotics and Intelligent Machines Research Group from University of Moncton in Canada. Before we start with what I view as an exemplary list of speakers today, I'd like to present our opening speaker for this event, Prof. Sinha. Prof. Sinha obtained his bachelor's degree with distinction, master's degree with distinction, and doctorate in electronic engineering from University of Pretoria. Prof. Sinha is a registered professional engineer with EXA, as well as a fellow of the IEEE. As an established researcher, he has authored or co-authored over 135 publications in peer-reviewed journals and international conferences, and he has authored 8 books in the area of 5G wireless communications. Prof. Sinha served the University of Pretoria for over a decade. His last service as director of the Carl and Emily Fuchs Institute for Microelectronics. In 2013, Prof. Sinha was appointed as Executive Dean of the Faculty of Engineering in the Built Environment at the University of Johannesburg. And as of 2017, he has been the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research and Internationalization at the University of Johannesburg. Among other leading roles, Prof. Sinha has also served the IEEE as the Board of Director and IEEE Vice President. It's an honor to have you open this conference, Prof. Sinha. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks very much, Professor Charis Harley, and to everyone who's been able to join us. And first to Professor Harley, thank you very much for organizing, to you and the research group on data sciences across disciplines. I want to firstly, give a little bit of background on why I think this conference is so important, and rather this conference series is so important for us as a university, but also as a country and as a society, where we are finding more and more ourselves developing into what is sometimes called Society 5.0, developed through the impetus of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. The University of Johannesburg adopted its position and approach for the Fourth Industrial Revolution as we enabled our new strategy in 2018. Very quickly, what we recognized was that the Fourth Industrial Revolution is not about technologies only. It is about how the blend between technology and society. The moment we start to look at it in this way, we start to see a transdisciplinary approach. Of course, the Fourth Industrial Revolution is not something that was unexpected. It was pretty much a very fast, accelerated convergence that occurred between data, algorithm, and this explosion that came about in the Third Industrial Revolution, brought about by computing, convergence between computing and communication. Now, I think what has been, and of course, it also involves a number, or sometimes we say it as confluence of technologies. So it is a multiple discipline in terms of both the technologies, but also in terms of society. But what I think has been very exciting is that you've had lots of data and you've had lots of algorithm, and I sometimes think of data as a feed for algorithms. But now some interesting things start to happen when you have algorithms kind of feeding on data. Of course, I'm speaking metaphorically, that this brings about a further new kind of data that is created, information that is created, which has a compounded effect. So you may have a data set, you may have another data set, and as a result of the processing of multiple algorithms, the end result could be new information, could be new data, and the potential for this data set that has now resulted to work with other data sets. And that's where one aspect or element of ethics emerges as a problem. Now, we are recently seeing, and some of you may be following, quite interestingly, what is happening with Facebook in the United States. And I think what was quite interesting was that the Facebook and the aspect, the Congress, reviewing Facebook, Google, Apple, and others. It was not altogether a new issue, but we saw during that progress, including the inquiry set up by Congress, that there is actually a lot to be understood by the political side on people who are reviewing and developing policies from a perspective of of data. But I think what is quite interesting right now, and for just in case for people who may not be familiar with it, is the case that is progressing with Facebook and the fact that there were algorithms, and these algorithms were engineered to make information that people enjoy or that people engage with to make this information more readily available. So now if you notice, if you pick up our own newspapers in South Africa, perhaps also in other parts of the world, you're likely to see that a lot of the news tends to be negative. And if news tends to be negative and people then engage with that negative news, it could be that you are unhappy because the news is negative, but it might also be that those negative sentiments assimilate with other sentiments that you may have at the time. So when those two elements come together, you find yourself engaging with that piece of information. It could be from anti-vaccination, it could be political campaigns, it could be other forms of campaigns that you may like or you may not like. And if you don't like and you engage, the Facebook algorithm has the potential to amplify that news. And that amplification has a number of undesired consequences. And that is part of what is being evaluated right now in terms of Facebook and what the algorithms have created in terms of misinformation. So there is that aspect, therefore, of the regulatory environment that goes with data science, but there is also an ethical component. I will touch on that a little later. So I think that the one aspect which this conference also brings together is the multiple disciplines. And so you will see in the program, as Professor Harley has indicated, that there are colleagues that are coming from engineering disciplines, there are colleagues coming from the humanities, the ethics, the ethics disciplines, and then also looking at, how do we actually look at biasness of data? How do we design algorithms differently? Now, on the last note, I want to talk a little bit about some of the works that we have observed, as Professor Harley indicated, that I used to serve the IEEE at one stage as vice president. And at that time already, that was 2014-15, we started to bring about and question and ask ourselves what kind of algorithm design speaking broadly, not only from a technical perspective, but also from the perspective of the humanities. And I'll elaborate briefly on that. What kind of design do we need with algorithms? And IEEE was at the time, we were hiring our new executive director, Dr. Welby came in. And one of the things that Dr. Welby very quickly brought about was the aspect of ethically aligned design. And so you could apply the thinking of ethically aligned design to algorithms and to data. You could say ethically aligned algorithms. So that process started through the IEEE Standards Association, and it progressed for a number of years. And in fact, one of the first set of principles that should be utilized around ethically and values-based design, and I will recap with quotation, and I will put the site where IEEE is looking at ethically aligned design into the chat window, and I'll catch on some of the general principles. The first general principle is the area of human rights. The second general principle is of well-being. The third general principle is data agency. The fourth area is effectiveness. The fifth, transparency. 6, accountability. 7, awareness of misuse. 8, competence. Now, if you take the lens and of the example that I sketched earlier in terms of social media, and if you take the lens, say, for instance, of awareness of misuse, it really changes the way that we think about data. So in the past, let's say I collected data about, let's say it's an attendance register. Then I take this attendance register, I put it onto a Google Drive. Meanwhile, Google has been developing its approach with optical character recognition. Now, the document, the attendance register that was filled in ink at one stage, with the optical character recognition, suddenly becomes searchable information, and it could become searchable information on the web. So in 2007, when I may have scanned a document, put the document as an attendance register onto Google Drive, I may not have thought about the fact that technology will in fact progress, and that data, that scanned document, was in fact feed for the algorithms, in this case of the optical character recognition, that made this information searchability. I didn't expect that. I didn't have that intention. When I archived it initially, it was because simply that I wanted to have that information handy. It was for audit purposes. But then that information accessibility evolved. Now, if you think about a principle such as awareness of misuse and awareness of this technology progress, I now have to be much more aware that collection of data and collation of data can lead to that fusion, which will have unintended consequences. So we actually have to think in terms of that. Now, progressing this a little bit more is that, and again, the publication that came out on ethically aligned design then looked at some areas of impact. One of the areas of impact deals with sustainable development. And I quite like this particular angle of sustainable development because I think that the sustainable development goals, of which there are 17, allows us to engage on a particular set of data or algorithms with a congruence of lenses. So the possibilities of the unintended usage becomes something that you have, you keep in mind more so right from the beginning. There are other areas of impact, which includes legal frameworks for accountability and also policies for education and awareness and personal data rights and agency over digital identity. So lastly, in terms of some of the areas of implementation that has come out also during the study are interesting domains, and they are truly transdisciplinary. I'll give one example. The area of effective computing rather than effective computing. But it seems that in tomorrow's computing, the way that we ordinarily think of computing, which is often in the area of zeros and ones, I think there is opportunities to think about points in between that. And these may be points informed by emotional intelligence. And at the university, we are also looking at research group activity in the area of affective computing, emotional intelligence, as also the way our emotions develop and evolve when we engage with data, and computing continues to evolve. And it's something that we would like to perhaps say that let's, kind of leave it to chance. But I think if we do leave it to chance, we will find ourselves in an era where, the currency of the data will remain under-acknowledged. And I think that would be quite a missing factor, particularly for countries such as South Africa. Yesterday, Professor Marwala was addressing, our Vice Chancellor in Principal was addressing different ambassadors of the European Union. And one of the questions he posed, which remained unanswered, was how much data of South Africa is being mined by companies that are for profit on a daily basis. And I think if you start to think about this, you start to think about also the kind of inequalities that gets built upon by this lack of kind of understanding of how data works. But ultimately, how do we actually build engineering principles and processes in future so that we have more and better acknowledgement for the ethical dimensions of data? And I think that if you have to kind of summarize the thinking that I put forward, which is also a thinking that IEEE has put forward, is the aspect of ethically aligned design. And once again, design thinking in a transdisciplinary sense. So with these words, Professor Harley, and to the team that has joined us this afternoon, I want to welcome you. I do believe that this conference series will be a very productive one. I hope that it will lead to research outputs as we acknowledge them in the form of book chapters, proceedings, at least in future, and also op-eds, so that we can enhance the thought leadership that is so required in this important field of data science and associated aspects of ethics and explainability, as has been put forward in the title of this event. And all the best to you and to the team during this engagement. Professor Harley, with these words, let me turn over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Sinha. We really appreciate your time and for actually setting the stage very much for the conference and providing proper context for the kind of work that we want to do.